Hello, it's Kathy again, and we're back with a demonstration of some more of the tools of Illustrator. Now, you may notice that instead of being in Illustrator, we're actually in Photoshop right now. And what I'd like to do, first of all, is explain a little bit about the difference between Photoshop and Illustrator. I find that many of my students are more familiar with Photoshop than Illustrator. We're not focusing on Photoshop in this class, although we will use it a bit for assignment 4. But the common question is, why are there two different programs that both deal with image making? And the answer is that Photoshop is a bitmap program and Illustrator is a vector program. So we've already talked a little bit about the fact that in Illustrator you're making paths that are equivalent to algorithms in the computer's mind. In other words, they're math equations. And in Photoshop, what you're doing is a little bit more analogous to working on a piece of paper with a pencil or pen. Let's look at that. We're going to start by experimenting a little with the brush tool in Photoshop. So click on your brush tool if you'd like to play along with me. I have it set for a 7-pixel brush on a high-resolution 300 dpi file. And I'm just going to click and drag and make some squiggly marks with my brush. And you'll notice that it's very much as if I'd taken a Sharpie pen or a pencil and made a line on my page. Let's zoom into that file. I'm going to hit, since I'm on a Mac, Command plus plus plus, and you can hit Command or Control plus if you're trying this along with me. And you'll notice that the sharp line that I had a minute ago gets a little bit fuzzy as we zoom down in. I'm going to zoom a little bit more, and you will see that we're actually looking at a bunch of pixels whose color has been changed by my brush. There's the brush head. Now that we're zoomed way in, those 7 pixels look a whole lot bigger than they did before. I'm just going to make a little spot on my file here by clicking. Now I'm going to click and drag to make something more like the lines that I made before. And you'll notice that the brush is turning the pixels on my file black in the center, and it's sort of gradating out just a tiny bit to make the line look smooth. In other words, it's putting a gray value on the edges, the pixels that are on the edges of the line. So when we zoom back out, we see what looks like a very sharp line, but when we zoom in, it's not sharp at all. And of course, this high-resolution file makes it look a little bit sharper. If the file were lower resolution, we'd see those pixels a little bit faster when we zoomed in. Let's open a file in Illustrator now and look at what happens when we use the pencil tool or the pen tool in Illustrator. Okay, here we are in Illustrator, and you'll notice that the screen looks very, very much like the screen for Photoshop. In fact, it's very, very easy to absent-mindedly think you're in one program and suddenly find that you're in the other. We're going to look at, let's say the pencil tool first of all. The pencil tool you may find underneath the shaper tool, which is usually lying on top of it. So hold the little tool down for a moment until the pencil tool appears. And I've chosen the pencil tool because it's the one that feels most like the paintbrush tool in Photoshop. Just like with the paintbrush tool, you're going to click and drag, and again I'm going to show my creative drawing ability here with a nice scribbledy line. Now you'll notice that instead of a black line, I get a blue line indicating that the path is selected. And if I take my selection tool here and look at it, I can hover over it and see that it says path until I get to an anchor point. Everywhere that Illustrator needs an anchor point along this line in order to control the curves of the line, you'll find that there is an anchor point. So let's give this line no fill, and in fact that's what it's already got here. It's got no fill and a black stroke, a 1-point black stroke. I'm going to select away so that we see this line as a black line, and it looks very much like the black line in Photoshop until we zoom in. I'm going to hit Command plus, you can hit Command or Control plus, and as we zoom in you will notice that the line does not get pixelated like it does in Photoshop. And the reason for this, we can zoom into this line until it fills our whole screen, and we will not see the individual pixels. And the reason is that the line is not composed of or thought of in Illustrator as a bitmap or map of the pixels in a file. This file doesn't have pixels in it. The image that you see here is completely created by an algorithm, a math formula, and it's very, very easy work for the computer to blow that math formula up to any size or shrink it down to any size without any loss of resolution. The other great thing about a vector line like this is that, let's select this thing again. I'm going to take the direct selection tool now and drill down into my path here and select only one anchor point, and you'll see that after I've selected that anchor point, I can click and drag it. It gets little handles. You'll remember these handles from using the pen tool in assignment 1. These little handles allow me to control, to reverse, to do anything I want with the curve of the vector path that I've drawn. So this line is editable. That's wonderful, and you may think, well, why would you want to make lines any other way? And the reason, of course, is that vector lines have their limitations. They are very simple. You can't make a vector drawing that looks exactly like the Mona Lisa, whereas you can photograph the Mona Lisa, give it to Photoshop, and tell Photoshop to render the pixels in exactly the right colors in exactly the right order to look an awful lot like the Mona Lisa. Therefore, we need both. The most designers find that in their files, they'll want both bitmap approaches, sometimes and vector approaches, sometimes, especially when designing for the web. Vector approaches to a design problem tend to be much less weighty and simpler and easier to make appear quickly on a computer screen. So there are times and places for both. Illustrator allows you to place Photoshop bitmap files, and it includes a few Photoshop rasterized effects. Photoshop allows you to make vector shapes and will allow you to import vector art from Illustrator. So the two things work fairly seamlessly together, but Photoshop is intended for bitmap work and Illustrator for vector work. I'd also like to show you the similarity between the pencil tool and the pen tool. We've used the pen tool previously, and the pen tool and the pencil tool are really pretty much the same tool. The pen tool, you'll remember, lays down an anchor point when you click, allows you to create a path between the two anchor points when you click again, and as you may remember from assignment 1, if you click and drag, you get a different kind of anchor point that allows for smooth curves. When you return to your original anchor point, you can close a shape, and then that shape will allow you to put any kind of stroke or fill in it that you like, and we've already demonstrated that, so I'm not going to go over that again. The pencil tool is simply a way of making those anchor points and paths between them, and in a more intuitive way that feels a little bit more like using a pen or a pencil. So you draw the line, Illustrator decides where the anchor points are going to go on your path and puts them in as you work in an attempt to slightly smooth out your path and make a vector path out of it. So I hope that distinction helps you to see why it's important to know whether you're in Photoshop or Illustrator and whether a bitmap or a vector approach is appropriate to the thing you're working on. I'd also like to just take a quick look at the line segment tool. The line segment tool, as you remember from assignment 1, allows you to click and drag and make a line segment. The problem with the line segment tool is that it feels like you're drawing with a pen or a pencil, and you can sometimes feel that you're making shapes with it when you're not. Let me show you this. We're going to make a rectangle here, and I often find that my students, when they want to divide up a shape like a rectangle, will choose the line segment tool and will simply make a line across it like that. And it feels to them very much as if they've taken a pen and divided their rectangle into two polygons. But if you then try to fill one of those polygons, you'll discover that, I'll give it a gray fill here, you have to fill them both at once. They aren't really two separate polygons, they're simply a rectangle with a line segment laid across it. The line segment does not split things into shapes the way your pencil does when you're drawing on paper. So it's important to know that the line segment tool has limitations. If you wish to split up a shape like that, you've got to choose a tool that will actually add an anchor point to that shape. And so that would be the pen tool or the pencil tool, obviously. So that's just a little bit to let you know the differences between the Photoshop brush tool, the pen tool, and the pencil tool, and the line segment tool in Illustrator. Here we are back in Illustrator for a fairly quick introduction to a couple of tools that may help you in the creation of more unpredictable, custom-made, possibly organic shapes. The Pathfinder window and the Shapebuilder tools. Let's take a look at the Pathfinder window. First of all, this is a way to take a couple of shapes and use them. I'm just going to quickly make a rectangle and let's say a star. There we go. I'll take a rectangle and a star, and I will select both of these shapes at once. I'm going to add to my selection by clicking Shift Select. I could also drag a selection marquee around these shapes. We'll open the Pathfinder window under Window, Pathfinder, and see how we can change these shapes. First of all, we can unite them. This is the, we're going to look at the shape modes in Pathfinder here today, and I'll let you look at the Pathfinder modes later on. The shape modes will be more useful for assignment 3, I think. So simply clicking on the Unite shape mode makes one shape out of these two shapes. You can move it around as one shape. You can give it a fill as one shape. You can do whatever you want with it. It is now one shape, and as you can see, this would be a very quick way to make more complex shapes that you could, especially if you want to give a fill to them, you can give a fill to them all together. Let's delete this shape and try the next Pathfinder shape mode. This time I'm going to take, let's say, the pencil tool and create a shape of my own. This will be a very organic shape. I'm looking for the little 0 that tells me the shape is closed, and I'll give the shape a fill just so we can see what we're doing a little bit. Now I'm going to take another shape, let's say a star again, and whoops, come on, there we go. And I'm going to move that star up a little bit here so that it really overlaps my organic shape. We'll give that one another fill so that you can tell the difference between the two shapes. Now we're going to go minus front, and we have to have both of the shapes selected, of course. Darn, there we go. I forgot to do that part. Okay, now we're going to go minus front, and you will see that the top shape, the star shape, has worked like an eraser or a cookie cutter and cut itself out of the bottom shape. The bottom shape, you'll note, is now in Illustrator's mind one shape, and we can take that one shape and move it around as if it were one shape, and we can fill it as if it were one shape. I'm going to delete this one now, and we'll try making a shape that we'll try using the intersect shape mode on a couple of objects. So we'll take our fancy star here, and let's take an ellipse, say, and we'll create an ellipse that goes down through the star. And now we're going to ask Illustrator for the intersect option on these shapes. We're going to have to select them all, of course, select them both all at once. I'll do it with a marquee this time. Click intersect, and we will simply end up with a shape that is the intersection of the two, the only place where they overlap. Finally, I'm going to delete this one, and we will do exclude. And this is a very interesting one. I'm going to make a bunch of shapes here and give them a nice black fill. Let's make a whole bunch of ellipses. And we're going to select these ellipses and choose the exclude button. And the exclude button takes away the intersection of the shapes. When you have black shapes on a white ground, this gives a feeling of interpenetration, which may be very, very useful for assignment 3. That was a very, very quick kind of a smoking tour through the Pathfinder window, but I basically just want you to know that it's there, where to find it. You open it again through the window menu, and if you wish to explore Pathfinder in a lot more depth, there are tutorials that you will find both in our resources and with a quick Google search online. Now I'd like to show you the Shapebuilder tools. I'm going to Command Z to step back to the original shapes that I have here without the exclusion put on them, and I'm going to take away their fills so that we only see the outlines, the stroke around the shapes. Now I'm going to go to Shapebuilder. Shapebuilder is this tool here. You see a couple of circles and a sort of a little arrow pointing to them. And if you look down underneath Shapebuilder, you'll see a couple of other tools called the Live Paint Bucket and the Live Paint Selection tool. More of those in just a moment. As with all these tools, you have to have your objects selected. So I'm grabbing my black selection tool, if you haven't done that already, to make sure the objects are all selected. And then with your objects selected, choose the Shapebuilder tool. You're now going to mouse over these objects without clicking, and you will see that Illustrator puts a sort of a screen pattern over individual regions within these shapes, even little itsy bitsy tiny ones like that. It's going to let us choose these regions if we wish. You'll notice I'm not choosing anything right now because all I'm doing is mousing over these shapes. I'm not clicking at all. But you'll notice that right now my cursor has a little plus sign next to it. And that means that if I click and drag across any boundary, and as I'm clicking and dragging now, you'll see that the strokes are turning to red to show that these regions are being activated. As long as I keep clicking and dragging across a shape, I will add those shapes together into one shape. And now, as you can see, so I've released my mouse, and those 3 regions that I had chosen have now been summed up into one shape. I can choose a couple others here. I can make a shape that looks like that, for example. And now these 3 regions have been combined into one shape. If I wanted to give these 3 regions a special fill, I could certainly do that by now that I have them combined into one shape. The Shapebuilder tool is, I believe, a slightly more intuitive way to do what the Pathfinder modes attempt to do, which is to combine regions or subtract regions from a design or from a set of paths that you have created, very much the way that we might combine regions in a drawing if we were working with a pencil on paper. We might erase a boundary here so that we can combine regions, or we might paint 3 regions the same color so that they combine to make one shape. In Illustrator, without the Shapebuilder and Pathfinder tools, you wouldn't really be able to do that. Illustrator thinks of these shapes as paths and not as boundaries that would be honored if you were, say, coloring the shapes in with a crayon or a paintbrush. So the natural way for Illustrator to think of these shapes is as separate ellipses, as I drew them using the ellipse tool. If we want to combine them the way we easily could with pencil on paper, we need to use these tools, which help us sort of bridge the gap between our conceptual model of drawing with a pencil and the way Illustrator works, drawing with these vector shapes. You can also hold the Alt key down and subtract a region from a shape. So you can take away shapes by dragging across them like that. The Alt key, you'll notice, created a little minus sign next to my arrow. So anyway, very, very useful and interesting tool, and you'll see already that I've created some shapes that you would never have expected to create with the ellipse tool right off the bat. Underneath the Shapebuilder tool are a couple of interesting tools called the Live Paint Bucket and Live Paint Selection tool. And I'm just going to show you the Live Paint Bucket very quickly. It's related to the Shapebuilder tool. It looks like a little bucket with some swatches across the top. And if you hit the keyboard arrows, you'll know, I just hit the arrow to the right, you'll see some different swatches they're kind of moving across. Whichever swatch I get in the center of my little triplet there is the active swatch, and I can keep clicking hoping to see something that I like. I'm going to work with black, however. The Live Paint Bucket tool allows you to mouse over a region which you drew with vector tools, but which you would like to break up into regions very much as we just did. And it allows you to take a little chunk like that and give it a color. You'll see that it colors the chunk in red with a red outline just before you click to let you know what region it's seeing there. Again, the shapes or regions, rather, that you wish to operate on must be selected first. This is a tool that will bail you out sometimes if you have, oh, here's something that my students do a lot. They'll say, take the ellipse tool. I want to make an ellipse without a fill here. Let's get an ellipse here. And then they will attempt to split that ellipse. I'm going to deselect it here so I can do this a little more easily. They'll attempt to split it with a line segment. They'll create a path which goes across the ellipse, and they will feel, just as you do when you're drawing with a pencil on paper, that they now have two segments. Unfortunately, of course, it's impossible to give those two segments different fills. If I try to fill my ellipse, I fill the whole thing, because this line segment tool does not split the shape. It simply makes a line segment across it. In order to split that shape, what we can do is select everything, including the line segment, of course, because this is an important part of the formation of regions here, and then go to the Live Paint Bucket tool. And in this case, I'm going to go back to black because I want to, if I can get back there, let's advance my color swatches. I should be able to color half of my ellipse because the Shapebuilder tool and the Live Paint Bucket tool that's related to it allow me to find regions within the set of paths that I've selected. So there you go. Very, very useful tools. Again, they may help you out if you have forgotten that you're working with vector paths instead of a pencil or a Sharpie pen on paper. And again, I urge you to explore these in more depth if you decide that you want to play with them. They are not required for Assignment 3, but you may find them extremely helpful. And they will definitely push you out beyond the palette, I'll say, of shapes that you can easily create in Illustrator to get shapes that are much more custom-made, unpredictable, and I hope possibly organic. Have fun!